Before sunrise, when the city is dark and still, a man begins his day. He dresses simply in black trousers and a white shirt, though some clock keepers wore uniforms. His tools are a heavy sack slung over his shoulder and a long hook in his hand. As he walks, the city stirs around him. At first, it's just a low murmur, but soon the sounds of a new day rise. The rumble of carts, the cries of vendors, and the distant clatter of machinery. He reaches a large building made of brick and stone, a monument to an age of industry. Its most prominent feature is a towering clock face, frozen at 9:30. Soon, others arrive. A station master in a crisp uniform, a guard with a short, sharp mustache, and a burly engineer wiping grease from his hands on a rag. Together, they ascend a long, spiral staircase to the clock tower. Here, silence descends. The only sound is the whirring of gears as the man approaches the largest gear of all. It's nearly 20 feet in diameter, made of thick brass with Roman numerals marking its edge. This is the heart of the clock, and the man is its caretaker. He winds the mainspring, a task requiring 30 minutes and all his strength. Once the mechanism begins to turn, it will power the clock for 8 days. Then he must return to wind it again. He checks the smaller dials, noting that the minutes and seconds must be wound every 2 hours. He sets his hook into the nearest gear and gives it a sharp pull. With that, he leaves the tower and walks away, disappearing into the crowd, returning to the quiet routine of his daily life. But how did such precision become so important? How did a simple clock in a station tower affect the lives of millions? In the early 1800s, timekeeping was not a science, but an art. There was no single time for London or Paris or New York. Each town had its own local time. And so, if you wanted to travel between them, your schedule would be thrown into chaos by the different rhythms of countless clocks. Then came the railroad, its quickly connecting cities. It allowed for trade, travel, and the spread of ideas on an unprecedented scale. But with that, the need for standardized time became urgent. The consequences of a miscalculation were now greater than ever. People gathered in public squares and train stations to consult the largest clock faces they could find. Their men worked tirelessly to ensure that every gear turned perfectly, every hand moved exactly. The most famous of these men was Joseph Blancpain, a Swiss watchmaker considered the father of modern timekeeping. In 1855, he designed what became known as the meridian line, a set of 24 time zones corresponding to the 24 hours of the day. At first, people resisted this imposition of order on a world that had always been free to set its own pace. Shops, factories, and homes refused to abandon their old clocks, leading to confusion and chaos. But slowly, the advantages of a shared time became apparent. No longer would travelers be baffled by the sudden change of clocks. No longer would a meeting at 9 o'clock send people running in different directions. By the end of the century, many countries had adopted the meridian line, and with it, a new profession was born. Men who kept the clocks turning, ensuring that time would not slip through their fingers. One evening, as the sun dips below the horizon, a man arrives home after a long day of winding clocks. He opens the door to a darkened room, lit only by the glow of his pocket watch. On the table, next to a pile of sawdust, is an unfinished wooden toy. He places his watch beside it and picks up a hammer. He begins tapping metal, adjusting a small clock face until it chimes perfectly. The soft chime echoes in the empty room, a melody of industry, precision, and solitude. Outside, the city stirs to life. Street lamps flicker on, music spills from tavern windows, and people stroll along the riverbank. But inside, there is only the gentle rhythm of hammer and chime. The quiet song of a clockmaker working alone by the light of a single candle. And as the last chime fades away, another mystery enters the room. A clock without a spring, ticking steadily. Is it magic, superhuman strength, or perhaps something else entirely? You decide. In the comments below, how did these clockmakers manage to synchronize the world? What mysteries did they solve? And why was one clock suddenly ticking without a spring? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Your job is important. You are the one who must start it. Keep it steady. Make sure it keeps good time. There are two faces of the clock. One looks out over the station, its hands sweeping across the sky like a giant metronome. The other, hidden from view, regulates the smaller clocks that dot the station, making sure that all the clocks in the station are in sync. The clock tower is silent now, but soon its quiet will be replaced by the city's clamor. When the first train of the day pulls into the station, its whistle will blow, echoing across the still sleeping city. And at that moment, you will bring the great clock to life, setting the pace for the day ahead. You wind the mainspring, the gears begin to turn, and the hands on the face of the clock start to move. The sound of the turning gears grows louder, then fades away into the distance as you slide open the panel, drop the weights, and release the chains. The great clock starts to tick. You check the smaller clocks around the station, making sure they are all in sync. And then you leave, knowing that for the next 24 hours, you have set the rhythm of the station. You are the clock keeper. You have tended this clock for many years. Its rhythm is familiar to you as your own heartbeat. But today is different. Today, a chill wind whistles through the tower, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The usually placid gears seem agitated, the steady tick of the clock off its usual pace. As you wind the spring, a sudden jolt runs through the machine, and one of the smaller clocks in the station strikes 13 times. Bad luck. Some superstitious passenger is sure to notice. You hurry to the clock, silencing it before anyone else arrives. Can't afford any more mistakes. Suddenly, the station comes alive. Passengers, porters, and ticket collectors fill the platforms. The first train of the day pulls in, hissing steam and clanking wheels. You race to the top of the tower, throwing open the door just as the whistle blows. The huge clock face weathers the wind, its hands sweeping across the sky. You drop the weights, release the chains, and listen for the telltale tick. Nothing. The clock is silent. Panic rises in your chest, cold and clammy. Without the great clock, the station will descend into chaos. All the clocks will be wrong. Trains will be missed. Connections will be lost. You fumble with the gears, trying to find the source of the problem. The station bustles below, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. You hear a cough, look up to see an old, wizened man peering at you from behind a clock hand. First time? He asks. You nod, too stunned to speak. It happens to all of us, the old man says, his voice like the ticking of a clock. The best clock in the world is useless without its heart. He points to a small, unassuming gear in the corner. That's the heart of the clock. Without it, the whole thing stops. With trembling hands, you reach for the gear. It is cold to the touch, lifeless. The old man leans closer. Sometimes the heart needs a little help, he whispers, placing a small, intricately carved wooden piece in your palm. It is warm, almost hot, and seems to thrum with energy. You don't know how, but you trust him. You place the piece in the gear and step back. The old man smiles. Now listen, he says, and you do. Faintly at first, then louder, the deep resonant tick of the clock returns. The station sighs with relief, the clocks begin to chime, and the city wakes to the steady rhythm of the clock tower. The old man fades away, leaving you alone in the tower with the newly awakened clock. The sun breaks through the clouds, painting the sky with gold. A new day has begun. The city stirs, the trains begin to roll, and the station clock, its heart beating steadily once more, sets the rhythm of the day. I am the clock keeper. I have tended this clock for many years. Its rhythm is as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. But sometimes the heart of the clock needs a little help. Sometimes an old man appears, his voice like the ticking of a clock, helping me to keep the time. And when the sun sets and the stars begin to gleam, I wind the clock for the night, its soft tick, lulling me to sleep. For I am the clock keeper, and it is my duty to keep the time. There was a time when clocks were all different. In London, some had chimes. In Paris, some had statuary. But over the course of 100 years, they've all become the same. It's frozen in an identical pattern of ticking pendulums and whirling escapements. All except this one. This is the last clock of its kind. And here's how it works. Your day begins at 5 a.m. with the winding. First, you fit the great brass handle to the winding socket. Then, bracing yourself, you begin to turn. The chain pulls against you, the resistance of the weight below. Each turn of the handle is a small victory, a section of chain uncoiling, a few more seconds of time released. Round and around you go, listening to the little noises of the clock. There's the groan of iron as the massive weight descends, the faint rattle of gears adjusting, the soft clink of the chain as it falls back into place. The air is thick with the smell of oil. The same lubricant you rubbed into the teeth of the wheels just yesterday, slowing their grinding to dust. It takes about 10 minutes to wind the clock, and you're halfway through your first turn before the sky even begins to lighten. It's repetitive work, but it must be exact. It's a few turns, and the clock will stop before tomorrow. To many, and the mechanism could jam. It's a careful balance, and you know the rhythm by heart. 28 turns for the striking weight, 22 for the going train. Then a final turn to reset the regulator, after which you check the escapement and adjust the pendulum. When at last the winding is complete, you step closer to the pendulum. It swings in a long, graceful arc, back and forth, like the steady breathing of the station itself. You bend low, listening to its sound. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The beat must be even. If it falters, even slightly, the hands outside on the great dial will betray you. They'll mark minutes too slow or too fast. And so you take the fine adjustment key and press it into the tiny nut at the base of the pendulum rod. With a single turn of the screw, you can shift the time by seconds each day. You pause, listen again, and nod. The rhythm is good. Already the first trains are preparing to depart. Outside, conductors glance upward to the face of your clock, setting their own pocket watches by its hands. Passengers shuffle nervously, trusting the dial to guide their journey. They do not see you alone in the tower, oiling gears, winding chains, checking the beat of the pendulum. To them, time simply is. To you, it is a daily labor, a duty to maintain the steady pulse of the station, so that the chaos of the railway, the steam, the whistles, the rush of wheels, might follow a single ordered rhythm. You spend your days in the company of others, and yet there are none to hear your stories. Sometimes the silence is broken only by the measured tick-tock of the great clock, or by the rumble of the railway far below. When the first train departs, you wipe the grease from your hands on a rag, ready for your next task. Though what that task may be, even you do not know. Maybe a new regulator, maybe a repaired escapement, or perhaps the rewiring of the entire clock. Whatever the task, you know it must be done. Like the rhythm of the train itself, there is no pause, no rest. Your world is full of gears, springs, and chains. The tools of your trade, your only company. For the rhythm of the railway must not change. The station's great clock must always keep perfect time. And so you work. All day, men come and go. They hurry along the platform, taking time with them in their hurried steps. They do not see you alone in the tower, with your oilskin and your screwdrivers, making sure that the time they take is the time they have. Soon, it will be time for you to wind the clock again. Time, like the railway, keeps perfect schedules. It never changes, never stops. You watch the hands turn on the great dial, knowing that soon they will be yours to control. And in that knowledge, there is peace. And what's more, this happened at hundreds of stations up and down the country, all at once. This is the story of those men, the men who brought us the idea of being on Greenwich Mean Time. So let me ask you a question. What time is it? You probably checked your phone or glanced at your watch. And in doing so, you take for granted an entire system of clocks, railways, and time zones that have been established over a period of decades. It's only when we look to the past that we see just how recent this apparently natural thing is. Imagine for a moment that it is the middle of the 19th century. The railways are spreading across the countryside, weaving iron threads that bind towns and cities together. But there is one great problem. Each place still keeps its own time. In London, noon might be when the sun reached its highest point. But travel 100 miles to Bristol, and noon would come a full 10 minutes later. Each town hall, each church steeple, each market square had its own clock, its own sense of the hour. For centuries this mattered little. Farmers lived by the sun. Merchants closed their shops when shadows grew long. But now trains thundered from one city to the next, their timetables dependent on exact minutes. Without uniform time, confusion reigned. trains collided. Passengers missed departures. The world demanded order. Enter the timekeepers, quiet men whose names are little remembered, but whose work touched the entire fabric of society. Among them was Sir George Airy, the astronomer royal, who in the 1840s began transmitting Greenwich Mean Time across the land. But even before the wires carried electrical signals, there were railway men, station masters, and clock keepers who took their instructions from the stars, from charts, from carefully measured shadows, and set their clocks accordingly. Van standing outside with a sextant in hand, waiting for the sun to crest at its highest point in the sky. He marks the exact moment on paper, compares it to his tables, and then, with careful steps, adjusts the hands of the great station clock. That single adjustment at noon became the measure by which every watch in the station would be set. Conductors, engineers, and passengers all gathered around, holding out their pocket watches, winding and setting them to the official time. It's hard to overstate just how disruptive this new system was. People were so used to the idea of local time, time measured by the position of the sun in the sky, that they didn't realize there was any other way of measuring time. There were even time police who went around smashing the clocks of those who were deemed to be deliberately setting their clocks too fast or too slow. By the end of the 1860s, however, most of England was running on Greenwich Mean Time, and a few years later, the world followed suit. But hold on a second. If these men set their clocks according to the sun, wouldn't that mean that their clocks would be wrong? Say that again, their clocks would be wrong? Yes, it turns out that if you go to Greenwich and measure the position of the sun at solar noon, you'll find that it isn't quite at the top of the sky as you might expect. In fact, it's about 90 seconds slow. This is because the Earth is actually wobbling on its axis very slightly. So the position of the sun in the sky doesn't tell you the true time. Instead, we tell the sun what time it should be. To do otherwise would be like counting the seconds between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock and deciding that actually 55 seconds is enough for one hole. Before the days of satellites and atomic clocks, astronomers would meet regularly at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich to compare their instruments and keep their clocks in sync. This is why you can still visit the Royal Observatory today and stand on the prime meridian line, the line that divides east from west. Right at the spot that we arbitrarily chose to call Greenwich Mean Time. There's something romantic, isn't there, about the idea of a man standing in the dark, adjusting the hands of a clock, setting the entire world to the correct time. Of course, that's not what happens. The job of the timekeepers has long since been taken over by quartz oscillators and computers. But next time you look at your watch, I want you to remember those quiet men whose names have been lost to history, but whose work made our modern world possible. Because without them, we'd all be lost in a world without time. Do you ever wonder how we all agree on time? For centuries, timekeeping was a surprisingly haphazard affair. Even as clocks became more common, there was no real way to ensure that a clock in one town matched the clock in another. There were sundials, of course, and shadows told the same story wherever they fell. But people wanted something more precise, a better way to measure the passing of the hours, minutes, and seconds. Then in the 1840s, a railway in England made an extraordinary decision. It chose to synchronize its clocks to the time at Paddington Station in London. And this was just for the convenience of travelers, or to make sure that trains arrived and departed on schedule. This was something bigger. It was a decision to impose order on an unordered world. And so began the strange and fascinating history of our obsession with being on time. For a moment, there was silence. The entire railway in that town synchronized by the decision of one quiet man. Over time, this practice spread. The railways began to publish schedules with remarkable precision. London Times slowly extended its reach. First, every station in Britain was brought under its sway. Then every port, every ship, every colony, and eventually, London time began to rule the waves, crossing the oceans to exert control over distant lands. In America, a similar struggle unfolded. In the early days, there were hundreds of local times. Noon in New York might not be noon in Philadelphia, but by the 1880s, under the guidance of men like William Allen, the railroads finally agreed to a system of standardized zones, At the stroke of noon on November 18, 1883, station clocks across the United States were reset. They called it the Day of Two Noons. Imagine it. You're standing in a station filled with waiting passengers. People are buying tickets, collecting luggage, children are chasing pigeons, and then suddenly, just before the train is due to arrive, the clock stops. Its hands are pushed forward or pulled back, depending on which side of the country you're on, to match the new official time. For one instant, there are two noons, the old one by which towns had always lived, and the new one dictated by the rails, by the telegraph, by the need for synchronization. For the passengers, it was a curiosity. For the newspapers, a sensation. But for the clock keeper, it was simply another adjustment. Another day in the long rhythm of winding, setting, and keeping order. He was the silent hand behind the progress of nations. And it wasn't easy being a clock keeper. To keep the hands of the nation moving accurately, they needed a standard, needed a way to ensure that their clocks were always synced with the sun. Entered the observatory. Every morning, the astronomer royal would measure the position of the sun and send the results to every observatory and clock tower in Britain and around the world. With this information, the clock keepers could adjust their clocks accordingly. Though for those at sea, life was more complicated. Without a telegraph to receive the astronomer royal's reports, they had to rely on the stars. Once a year, when the sun's rays were at their most direct, they could set their clocks by noon. But for the rest of the year, they needed to estimate the sun's position based on the phases of the moon. It was a tricky business, but somebody had to do it. And these men, anonymous in history, carried an enormous weight. By their care, trains ran safely. By their accuracy, commerce flourished. And by their diligence, the very idea of the hour was reshaped. This is a great moment for human progress. But whose hour is it anyway? Time zones are a human invention decided upon by committees and imposed by those with the power to enforce them. Greenwich Mean Time was good enough for Britain, but as the British Empire grew, so did the need for precision. By the mid-19th century, there were calls for a more standardized system. And so, the International Meridian Conference met in Washington,
8.
D.C. in 1884 to decide once and for all what time it was around the world. They chose a line of longitude that ran through the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, England, as the prime meridian. Then they divided the world into 24 time zones, each one an hour apart. But even then, there was still some pushback. The French didn't want their time dictated by the British, and some American territories, including Arizona and Hawaii, didn't fully adopt standard time until 1918. But by the early 20th century, the system was complete. From the North Pole to the South, from the edge of the Arctic Circle to the edge of the known universe. The clock towers of the world all chimed in unison. So the next time you glance at a clock, whether on your phone or on a glowing screen by the bedside, imagine the man in the tower, sextant in hand, watching the sun set, keeping the time across a nation, while the world quietly aligned itself to his time. One such story comes from a station in the English countryside, sometime in the mid-19th century. The clock was an ordinary one by design, a tall, weight-driven mechanism kept in a tower that overlooked the platforms. It was cared for faithfully. Each morning, the attendant would wind it, pull the heavy chain until the weight was at the top, ready to start its slow descent. Then he'd set the pendulum swinging, oiled the gears, and finally step back to admire the clock face, pleased with his handiwork. It was a good clock, solid, reliable, telling the time in the measured tones of a long-ago era. And yet, the keepers noticed something unusual. Even when the winding weight had been fully lowered, when the clock should, by all accounts, have stopped, the hands continued to turn. Slow, steady, unbroken. It ticked through the hours, as if powered by something unseen. The reports were never sensationalized. They were written in the calm, measured language of railway men not given to exaggeration. They simply recorded their observation. The clock ran when it should not have run. It wasn't a new clock, nor an old one. It had been installed in 1848, along with the rest of the station. It was built of stone, a squat tower with a clock face that told the time to travelers below. At first, nobody thought much of it. After all, clocks were not known for their eccentricity. They were supposed to tell the time in a repetitive, predictable fashion. But as weeks passed and the mystery deepened, theories began to emerge. Some suggested that air currents in the tower pushed gently against the pendulum, keeping it swinging long after its power had waned. Others argued that vibrations from the trains themselves, the thunder of wheels, the shudder of the ground, gave just enough energy to keep the mechanism alive. The railway was, after all, a place of constant motion. But to the men who wound the clock each day, it was still uncanny. They would climb the stairs, lantern in hand, expecting silence. And instead, they found the steady tick-tock, echoing in the chamber, as though the clock refused to admit its own death. And then there was the night watchman, a man whose beat took him past the station every hour. He was the first to raise the alarm, or rather, to raise his suspicions. It was he who noticed that the clock's minute hand moved with unnatural smoothness, as if it had found some hidden wellspring of energy. He reported it to the station master, a portly man whose attention to detail was legendary. Investigated, ascended the tower, wound the clock, checked the pendulum, all to no avail. He, too, heard the ticking, felt the steady swing, and saw the relentless march of the minute hand. So the matter stood, a mystery whispered in the hushed tones of railwaymen. A story carried on the steam breath of passing engines, a secret shared between the tracks. In an age of steam and smoke, of hissing pressure gauges and clanking wheels, it was an oddity that defied explanation. For the men who lived and worked on the railway, it became a kind of folklore, a reminder that even in the most regulated environments, there were things that simply could not be explained. They couldn't stop the clock, so they simply noted its behavior in their logbooks. Next to the times when the moon was full and the rain fell hard, no headlines, no dramatic pronouncements, just the quiet observation of men who knew that sometimes the best explanation was simply that there were things that didn't need explaining. There are many ways to tell time, but perhaps the most enduring is the steady tick-tock of a well-regulated clock. For centuries, these mechanical marvels have marked the hours, keeping us on track with the rhythm of daily life. But what happens when a clock seems to defy its creators? When gears grind against each other, springs wind and pendulums swing, an intricate dance of mechanics unfolds. Yet sometimes the music of the clock seems to take on a life of its own. In time, the mystery faded into routine. The clock was cleaned, its weights reset, its pendulum adjusted. Life went on. But the story lingered, whispered among workers as an example of the strange ways machines sometimes seem to possess a will of their own. And this was not the only case. Across Europe, in old stations and town halls, there were tales of clocks that kept imperfect time, or that struck the hour at unexpected moments, or that ran without winding, as if defying their keepers. Some were later explained by science, by physics, by the quirks of worn gears and resonant vibrations. Others were left unresolved, their secrets hidden in wood and iron. Today, when archaeologists and horologists examine these old station clocks, they often discover ingenious mechanisms, devices designed to regulate the swing of a pendulum, or to capture the faintest tremor of motion. They study traces of oil left on gears, or the worn patterns in teeth and cogs, to understand how the clock lived and breathed over its long years. But to those who stood beneath them, in the quiet hours of the station, the mystery was less technical and more personal. A clock that ran without power felt alive. A machine that ticked on in the silence of night became a companion. A reminder that time itself, once set in motion, does not easily stop. And so, the story of the clock that moved on its own became another thread in the tapestry of railway lore. Not a tale of ghosts or superstition, but a gentle wonder that even in the ordered world of gears and timetables, there was room for the unexplained. This episode was brought to you by our supporters. It's just like the rhythmic ticking of a clock. Our supporters provide a steady beat to the stories we're able to tell. Their support allows us to keep our content free for everyone, ensuring that the curious and the wonderful continues to find its way into the world. If you'd like to be part of this timekeeping crew, you can learn more about our support system through the provided information. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to the mystery of the clock that moved on its own. These inexplicable occurrences were not merely curiosities. They were, as the French essayist and novelist Alguy wrote in his book L'amour des vingt ans, a kind of poetry. They hinted at the hidden drama within the clock's machinery, a drama as compelling as any human drama. Imagine, if you will, the grand halls of an old station echoing with the measured tick-tock of a monumental clock. It's a sound that lulls travelers into a sense of timeless calm. Then suddenly, a discordant note strikes, shattering the tranquility. The clock has stopped, or perhaps it's moving, counting the seconds when it should be still. This is more than a mere malfunction. It's a disruption of the very fabric of order. It challenges the rational world we inhabit, reminding us of the inexplicable mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Such tales were not confined to the pages of fantasy novels. They were real-life occurrences, whispered conversations around oil lamps and railway workshops, shared between those whose lives revolved around the rhythmic pulse of the trains. In their hands, the stoic machines took on a life of their own, becoming characters in an unfolding narrative. The allure of these stories lies not only in the enigma of the clock's behavior, but also in the human response to the unknown. Faced with a machine that defies logic, one's first instinct is often to seek an explanation. Was it a trick of the light, a momentary lapse in reason, or something more sinister? This innate curiosity led to the birth of folklore, to myths and legends that wove themselves into the very fabric of railway culture. As the Industrial Revolution swept across Europe, giant clocks dominated town squares and train stations. Their measured ticks a constant backdrop to the relentless churn of progress. But with their grandeur came an air of mystery, an allure that drew people in with promises of the extraordinary. Today, in an age of digital precision, the analog charm of old clocks seems almost antiquated. But the fascination they inspire remains as vivid as ever. In the whirring of their gears, we hear echoes of a bygone era, a time when the boundaries between the mundane and the magical were far less rigid. When we encounter a clock that defies our expectations, it awakens something primal within us, a blend of fear and wonder that resonates with the oldest parts of our being. It reminds us that, in a universe governed by inexorable laws, there are still pockets of mystery, places where the only certainty is uncertainty. So the next time you find yourself captivated by the enigmatic rhythm of an old clock, know that you're not alone. You're part of a timeless tradition, a lineage of thinkers and dreamers who have always found poetry in the ticking of clocks. Far from the iron towers and the echo of station clocks, another world of timekeeping unfolded. A quieter, more luxurious world. A world where time was measured not just in seconds and minutes, but in the finest gold and silver, where the tick-tock of a clock was a lullaby and where the language of time was whispered, not shouted. Our story begins in the heart of London, in a place where time was both currency and treasure. It's the 1800s, and we find ourselves in the hallowed halls of the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. Here, amidst the stars and the sextants, lives a man who could read the heavens like a book. A man who commanded the very essence of time itself, an astronomer named John Henry. With his star charts and astronomical tables, he could predict the tides of the sea and the phases of the moon with uncanny precision. But there was a problem, one that gnawed at his scientific soul. The clocks that marked the passage of time were inaccurate, unreliable, a cacophony of ticking and talking. And so he turned to the stars, seeking a rhythm more pure, more true. And under their silent gaze, he developed a new type of clock, a marine chronometer that could keep time at sea. A marvel of engineering that would bring order to the chaos of timekeeping. His invention changed everything. It bridged the gap between land and sea, ensuring that time, like longitude, could be measured anywhere. But the quiet hum of the chronometer had a curious side effect. It created a space, a realm where time was not just measured, but cherished. A place where the language of time was spoken in hushed tones, not in the clangor of bells or the screech of steam whistles. We now shift our scene to the drawing rooms and smoking rooms of the wealthy, where men of leisure gathered, their pockets filled with time. Not just any time, mind you, but exquisite timepieces that were as much a status symbol as a means of keeping the time. These were no longer the crude tools of industry, but the embodiment of luxury, of meticulous craftsmanship, and timeless elegance. These pocket watches were a conversation piece, a symbol of one's social standing, a way to subtly communicate one's wealth and refinement. They were works of art, often featuring intricate designs and patterns that were a feast for the eyes. The men who owned these watches took great pride in them, It's not just because of their beauty, but because of the precision with which they kept time. They were not mere playthings, but instruments of accuracy, marvels of engineering that allowed these gentlemen to always know the precise time.
Down to the smallest second.
And when the time came to wind these exquisite mechanisms, it was an intimate moment, a quiet ritual that connected these men to the inner workings of their prized possessions. It was during this ritual that the true language of time was spoken, a language of delicate clicks and whirs, of gears and springs. It was a language without words, understood only by those who had the patience and the passion to unravel the secrets of these miniature universes. And as the night wore on and the conversation flowed, these men would idly compare their watches, not because they needed to, but because the language of time was a siren song, a melody that echoed in their souls. They would listen to the different ticks, noting the slight variations in their tempo, appreciating the unique rhythm of each timepiece. For them, these watches were not just instruments of measurement. They were companions, confidants, and perhaps even friends. They were part of their everyday lives, as much a part of their identity as the clothes they wore or the cigars they smoked. So, if you ever find yourself in a grand old house, surrounded by antiques and artifacts of a bygone era, take a moment to appreciate the quiet language of time that lingers in the air. Listen closely. And you might just hear the echoes of those bygone days when time was measured in the finest gold and silver. You might just hear the whispers of an age, when the language of time was a melody played only for those who truly loved the music of the spheres. And yet, even as they admired the artistry of their timepieces, they relied on another man, the quiet figure in the station tower. For when they set their watches, they looked not to the sun nor to the stars, but to the great clock above the railway platform. Its steady hands dictated the true hour, against which even the finest Swiss movement must be judged. There is a gentle irony in this contrast. At one end of society, a man climbs a cold stairwell, oils, gears, winds, heavy chains, and listens for the even beat of a pendulum. At the other, another man in velvet gloves adjusts the hands of a golden watch, confident that it marks the correct time. Both in their way are bound to the same rhythm, one by labor, the other by leisure. In grand halls and private studies, time became a symbol of refinement. The wealthy collected watches the way others collected art, each one a marvel of craftsmanship. They spoke of minutes and seconds with fascination, as though the measurement of time itself was a form of control. But in truth, all of their watches, however splendid, were only reflections of the humbler clocks that ruled the stations. For when the whistle of a train echoed across the countryside, when departures and arrivals unfolded with precision, it was not the golden watch that ensured order, it was the man in the tower, keeping the station clock in motion. So while the wealthy reclined in velvet, comparing ticking treasures, the true heartbeat of the age remained with the unseen keepers of time. The words we use to describe time, to dissect its passing, or to measure its worth, are often hollow echoes of our own perceptions. We speak of time marching on, yet it's not an army we hear, but the measured tick of a clock. We say time heals all wounds, yet what mends a broken heart is not the abstract march of seconds, but the steady hand of a friend. Time, in essence, is a companion, sometimes a silent observer, sometimes a demanding taskmaster. It shapes our lives, yet rarely shows its own form. And so we turn to symbols, to clocks and watches, to capture its fleeting essence. For some, a pocket watch becomes a cherished heirloom, a tangible link to generations past. It's a ritual to open the hinged case, to feel the cool metal against the palm, to wind the key until the soft click of the ratchet sings a familiar tune. This is more than just a clock. It's a conversation across time, a dialogue between the present and the past. The watch, with its rhythmic tick, becomes a storyteller, whispering tales of bygone days. It speaks of cobbled streets and horse-drawn carriages, of dimly lit drawing rooms and the quiet tread of waltzes. Each tick is a memory, each talk a story. And then there are those who find solace in the eternal recurrence of the clock face, who seek refuge in the steadfastness of its hands. As the world outside changes, the clock remains constant, its ticking a soothing lullaby amidst the chaos. To stand before a clock, to watch the hands move with hypnotic precision, to find a momentary anchor in the shifting tides of life. It's a reminder that despite the ebb and flow of human affairs, the world keeps turning, the seasons will change. And life, like the hands of a clock, moves forward inexorably towards the next turn, the next cycle, the next story. In the grand narrative of our lives, the tick-tock of a clock is more than just a measurement of time. It's a testament to human ingenuity, a reflection of our need to understand and control the world around us. It's a conversation with history, a connection to the past, and a lullaby for the soul. In the heart of London, nestled between the bustling South Bank and the historic Palace of Westminster, stands the grand yet unassuming Elizabeth Tower, more commonly known as Big Ben Tower. This iconic structure houses the Great Bell, nicknamed Big Ben. You've probably heard of it before. Its bell chimes resonate across the city, marking the hours with an unmistakable sound. But there is another sound within the tower, one that has been fading into the background hum of London for over a century. It is the soft, rhythmic tick-tock of the clock. It's a sound that carries within it a story of dedication, precision, and the quiet heroes who made modern life possible. Big Ben's clock is a masterpiece of Victorian engineering. Crafted in the mid-1800s, its 4 clock faces are a prominent part of London's skyline. But these clocks don't just mark time, they keep it. They maintain the pulse of the city, ensuring that every second ticks precisely to allow trains to run on time, shops to open when expected, and lives to be lived out in perfect synchronicity. Within the clock's mechanism, gears rotate, pendulums swing, and escape wheels breathe, each part playing a crucial role in keeping accurate time. This intricate dance of mechanics requires constant care and attention. High above London, amidst the whirry gears and ticking pendulums, sits the caretaker. Dressed in crisp attire, he meticulously cleans and oils the clock's components, ensuring that every gear rotates smoothly and every pendulum swings freely. His hands, calloused yet gentle, move with a precision born from years of experience. He listens intently to the clock, attuned to the subtlest of sounds, for a change in rhythm could signal a problem. With a practiced eye, he checks the clock's dials, adjusting them ever so slightly to keep the hands in perfect sync. His day begins before the sun rises, for the clock must be wound. Every morning he climbs the tower's narrow stairs, the rhythmic clang of his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Reaching the clock, he begins the ritual of winding, turning the crank with a steady hand until the mainspring is taut and the clock is ready for the day. As the sun climbs higher, he continues his rounds, cleaning, adjusting, and repairing. Each tick-tock of the clock is a testament to his work, a reminder of the importance of his role. For within this clock tower, time itself is kept alive. The story of the clock keeper is one of dedication and solitude. Day in, day out, they tend to the intricate machinery, ensuring it keeps perfect time. Their work is not glamorous. In fact, they often work in obscurity, far from the public eye. Yet their contribution is immeasurable. They're the unsung heroes of accuracy, the quiet guardians of time. But why is it important that these clocks are kept accurately? Why isn't it okay if they're just a few seconds off? Or what if trains leave a minute later, or arrive a few seconds early? The answer lies in the very nature of the railway system. When trains began to traverse the country, they didn't just carry goods or passengers, they carried schedules. Timetables became a social contract between train companies and their customers. If a train was scheduled to depart at 8 p.m., it did so without fail, or at least it was supposed to. The consequences of even a slight miscalculation were enormous. A train arriving late could mean missing a connecting service, disrupting the entire journey. A departure time that was even a minute too early could leave paying customers stranded at the station. And then there was the safety aspect. Trains rely on a complex network of signals, timetables, and interlocking systems to operate safely. If one train departed early or arrived late, it could throw the entire system into chaos, potentially leading to collisions or derailments. So who are the men tasked with such a monumental responsibility? Clock keepers came from all walks of life. Some were former engineers or watchmakers, while others had no prior experience. What they lacked in initial knowledge, they often made up for with dedication and keen observation. Training was minimal, usually consisting of on-the-job instruction and a crash course in the inner workings of the particular clock they were responsible for. They'd learned to read the clock's rhythms, to anticipate its needs, and to respond to its demands. The job was demanding, requiring stamina, patience, and an eye for detail. They worked long hours, often 7 days a week, with little time off for bad weather or personal appointments. Their dedication was absolute, their commitment unwavering. Despite the challenges, life as a clock keeper was not without its perks. They enjoyed a close relationship with the clock, becoming attuned to its every tick and talk. They took pride in their work, knowing that they were an integral part of a system that was transforming the world. As time went on, the role of the clock keeper evolved. New technologies and materials allowed for more efficient and accurate timekeeping. Many clock towers were equipped with electric or electronic clocks, reducing the need for manual winding and adjustment. However, the tradition continued in some places, driven by the desire to preserve history and the charm of the old. Today, the story of the clock keepers is fading into the past. Big Ben's clock is undergoing major restoration work, and the clock-keeper-esque cottage is now a museum. The rhythmic tick-tock of the clock still echoes within the tower, but the figures who made it possible have become a thing of the past. Yet their legacy lives on in the precise minutes on your phone. The digital numbers glowing at your bedside, the timetables that govern modern life. All of it traces back to the men who first kept time for the railways. They were the pioneers of precision, the architects of accuracy. In a world where time was a luxury, they made it a commodity. In the age of steam and steel, they ushered in an era of punctuality. In a world governed by the whims of nature, they introduced a new master, the clock. And as we step into the 21st century, we find ourselves living in their shadow, forever bound to the rhythm of the clock. When I think about this story, I am reminded of something my grandfather once told me. He said that our lives are like pendulums, constantly swinging between the past and the future. Sometimes we dwell too long in the past, hankering for a simpler time. Sometimes we're so focused on the future that we forget to appreciate the present. But it is in the delicate balance between these two, in the careful keeping of time, that life finds its harmony. And so we leave the world of the 1800s clock keeper, a world of winding, adjusting, and listening, where every day began with the same climb up narrow stairs, and every evening ended with the pendulum's slow, steady swing. Their work was not glorious and rarely remembered, but it shaped the rhythm of nations. Trains departed safely, commerce flowed smoothly, and society itself began to live by the clock rather than the sun. As you drift toward sleep, imagine that steady tick, echoing through a quiet tower. Tick-tock, tick-tock. A rhythm as old as memory, as constant as breath. The sound of time itself carried forward by those who cared for it. Good night.